Hello everyone, and welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we are continuing our deep dive series into the Bermuda Triangle with part 19. I hope you all have had a good week. We are beginning chapter 4 today from the Gian J Quasar book. Hey Zen, good to see you. Thank you. I appreciate that. So this is the chapter we'll be reading today. Can it be that simple? So, the past 2 weeks we covered a bunch of the missing ships. I hope you all enjoyed that. There's a lot of questions still, a lot of mystery that is still present with everything. But we know how far back it goes now. And chapter 3 was about 32 pages if you include all the photographs as well. With 31 pages. But anyways, today's chapter, it's not nearly as long. We're going from page 83 to 96. I think we'll be able to finish this entire chapter 4 today. But we will be looking at different ley lines. So, let's get this slideshow going. So as always, we have the Illuminati here. And for those unaware, this was a submersible that inspected the ocean floor in the triangle. And I know I say it pretty much every show, but it did find a road that was just on the bottom of the ocean. So water levels did increase at some point in the past. And my theory is we're going to have water decrease. All that needs to happen is a fissure on the ocean floor and then like a bathtub drain. Although it wouldn't be too severe, I don't think. But yeah. Alright, let's get to it, shall we? So chapter 4, can it be that simple? Those who believe there isn't any such phenomenon as the Bermuda Triangle tend to blame the disappearances on very conventional causes like mechanical malfunction, basic bad weather patterns, and human error. They also tend to regard the subject only in passing and ascribe popular interest in it to gullibility, sensationalism, and ignorance. They might also tend to generalize a solution to the subject by noting that on occasion a writer or columnist reported a ship's position in error, and that it was really thousands of miles away from the triangle when it vanished. They imply or state outright that all research therefore falls under suspicion, and they assert that if reporting were done better, a simple solution would be found for all disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle for which there is at present no explanation. In general, they tend to believe that any point of view beyond this can only be expressing a desire in the supernatural or the occult. Because they do not display a broad or protracted interest in the subject, they do not pursue any solution to it beyond that of citing known cases of poor seamanship, bad navigating, careless flying, and so on, and then they apply these to the broad list of missing vessels and planes. The fact is, however, that those many cases were known because the participants survived to recount what happened, and to be embarrassed by their mistakes. The assumption is made that the survivors of mishaps at sea were simply the lucky ones. The others who disappeared simply were not so lucky, and that no trace of them was found was simply coincidental. They offer the reassurance that these are just statistical losses that can be placed under conventional categories because they have never heard of or prefer to dismiss out of hand any stories from survivors, the quote, lucky ones, unquote, of anything odd or unusual about their accidents. Hey Paul, good to see you. Great to have you here. So we're just talking about the naysayers, the people that want to chalk this up to nothing. But as we've seen in this series so far, there's a lot of just completely disappearing vessels along with disappearing people. And really no explanation for it. And the general public, it scares them. So they prefer to just gloss over it or write it off. It's just unfortunate. But let's continue here. They are also more likely to insist on a strict adherence to the triangular shape for the area. And then they exclude any incident from consideration that happened outside it, even if only by a few miles. This naive approach to argument and debate is tantamount to saying there is no mystery because there is no triangle. In a way, however, they are quite correct. There is no triangular shape. And I think we understand that too. It's a general shape here. But it falls within a very specific region. I will show there's actually a map here on the next page. We'll look at that shortly. After all, there is no other reference point in the entire Western Atlantic Ocean except Bermuda, without referring to the cumbersome and nondescript coordinates of latitude and longitude. Miami and San Juan are well-known cities and ports, and besides being radial points, their names instantly bring geographic recognition to most people's minds. When Vincent Gaddis coined the term Bermuda Triangle, he did so with this journalistic codicil. Quote, in and about this area, end quote. So it's always been a general frame of reference. Others have sought to delineate the area more laboriously and have subsequently come up with varied shapes and sizes. Ivan T. Sanderson, who dealt extensively with it in Invisible Residence, I assume that's the name of a book here, so let's write that down. Invisible Residence by Ivan T. T. Sanderson. We're going all the way with this series. So if you've been following along since the beginning, or if you've caught up at this point, we're going through all of this literature. I don't care how long it takes. I've actually thought about doing 2 shows a week to speed up the process. But again, I'm trying to just digest this as thoroughly as possible. And doing this once a week has been working, so why change the format, I say. So Ivan T. Sanderson, who dealt extensively with it in Invisible Residence, stated categorically, quote, "It is not a triangle, and its periphery is much greater. In fact, the area forms a large, sort of lozenge-shaped area, which extends from about 30 degrees to 40 degrees north latitude, and from about 55 degrees to 85 degrees west," end quote. Investigator Richard Weiner, spelled W-I-N-E-R, in The Devil's Triangle, which I believe that's another publication. I can't say if that's a book or not. He proposed, quote, "The Devil's Triangle is not a triangle at all. It is a trapezium, a 4-sided area in which no 2 sides or angles are the same," end quote. He adds, quote, "The area commonly called the Devil's or Bermuda Triangle is actually only 1/4 the size of the actual triangle or trapezium," end quote. According to John Wallace Spencer, in his Limbo of the Lost, there we got another one here. Limbo of the Lost. By John Wallace Spencer. The first book entirely devoted to the subject. Hey. It extends from, quote, Cape May, New Jersey to the edge of the continental shelf, following the shelf around Florida into the Gulf of Mexico. It continues through Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and other islands of the West Indies, and then comes up again through the Bahamas, then up once more to Bermuda, end quote. Ironically, this amorphous body harkens back in some ways to the very beginning of interest, as seen in E.V.W. Jones's Associated Press article in 1950 that first broached the subject of an area of mysterious disappearances off the U.S. East Coast. And so those are initials, E.V.W. Jones. In his Associated Press article. So I guess there wasn't a... They're not listing a title. Associated Press. That's in 1950. Alternative triangles have also been proposed by others connecting Bermuda, Key West, Chesapeake Bay, San Juan, or Miami. Take your pick. The most seriously considered alternative is the port of Norfolk, Virginia, about 600 miles northwest of Bermuda. Drawing a line on a map between all these points would essentially bring to light a sea graphed by 4 triangles, Envisioning a somewhat similar territory, John Godwin in his book This Baffling World amusingly labeled his area the quote, Hoodoo Sea. Hoodoo. Hoodoo. In any case, for those who believe there is no mystery, there is no shape. Any disappearance is first blamed on the pilot of a plane or skipper of a boat. Usually this is the first choice because weather information proves there were no hazards. No matter how often this excuse raises its head, it does so as an accusation, not as an explanation. Since nothing is left from a disappearance, human error simply becomes a category of suspicion. So far, the most outspoken proponent of the theory that human error is a major culprit is the U.S. Coast Guard. They made their position clear in a 2-page form letter prepared about 30 years ago by their headquarters in Washington. And again, this is a book from 2004, so we're talking about 1974 for that Coast Guard letter. The continuing disappearances have warranted them, plus many other U.S. government bureaus, to keep it on hand for the inquirer, would-be traveler, and curious correspondent. So we have a map here. Hey Texas Learning, good to see you. This map here states 3 varied shapes as opposed to the typical triangle. The triangle linking Bermuda, Chesapeake Bay, Norfolk, Virginia, and the Florida Keys. The dotted line is an estimate of John Spencer's Limbo of the Lost, and the broken line represents Richard Weiner's Trapezium or Devil's Triangle. So this map here, you can see where Florida's at on this right here. This is the typical triangle area. But then we have the, I believe, what is it, the Limbo of the Lost. John Spencer's area is the small dotted line one that's going up and over to the top. And it also continues down here. There we go. And you see that extends really far into the Gulf there. Richard Weiner's Trapezium. That's this one that's coming all the way off to the end of the page here. So the area does cover quite a lot of ground. And as the beginning of this chapter was saying, anything outside of this initial triangle, they want to dismiss as, oh, it's not part of the Bermuda Triangle, but really, this entire area is grounds for these disappearances. Paul asks Steve, these triangles, do they have a field surrounding them like magnetic? It does seem that there's magnetics involved in this. because we do have accounts of ships that should have been approaching Fort Lauderdale, and their radio signal gets picked up in New York. And I believe over here is Norfolk, Virginia. So, like, there's something that happens here where time and space is distorted, and the planes and the ships can bounce locations. And there's evidence of that happening with several of these cases. What I'm thinking... Okay, I'll show this map again and tell you what I'm thinking is going on here. Somewhere in the center here, there's probably an old world generator. And this is actually that's something that someone else said. But that might be what's causing these anomalies, is something that's here. Because you consider that there's roads on the bottom of the ocean floor. There's probably a whole city here that had some sort of energy generator. And considering ley lines also cross right in this area, there's so many ley lines that pop up there. I showed it once before on the ley line maps, and they've changed that website since I showed it, surprisingly. Where I can't go and add the lines as easily to the map. I have to do it all individually now instead of the way that we saw it before, where everything was cross-sectioning over the Bermuda. But there's 12 points like that on our Earth here. And so the Bermuda Triangle is one of those 12 points. Now, there's also been concepts brought up that the ley lines are man-made. If that's the case, it could be connected to this old world that got wiped out, that, like, history doesn't talk about. If they made the magnetic ley lines, then that's why they're there. Otherwise, it's just a naturally occurring thing. But why would so many lines cross-section right here like a star? And then the ley lines are magnetic too. So, to answer your question, there is a magnetic field here in this general area. But it runs through... There's one that runs a little south of Miami. If I recall correctly on that. So here, this map on the next page, it says, an approximation of where major aircraft and ship disappearances have occurred based on known course and position last reported by radio or radar. Because of long courses, scant radio messages, or vague boat plans, many locations cannot be estimated for those traveling in the Bahamas or the Bermuda, or to Bermuda. Though within the last 40 years, a large number must have vanished. And so this gives us little triangle blips on a map that shows all the disappearances that are known. I mean, come on. You start covering each one of these cases, and you're going to tell me all this is by random? And this is... I'm speaking to the people that are naysayers on this, but really, they're not here. If they're new to this channel and they're just looking at this now, like, why don't you go do some homework and look at all of these different disappearances? And you tell me if there's no correlation to any of this. It's just all accidents, right? The people just disappeared, nobody could find the boats or the people, right? Now, just the fact that, like, the Florida Keys is very heavily populated with these disappearances, I want to say there's something actually right off the coast of Florida that we haven't noticed yet or identified that's in relation to this. But it's generally this whole area here. And for all we know, these islands could have once been mountains, with a basin with dry land in the center here, where people used to live. Paul, I'm not sure if PRT's on today. I haven't been keeping up lately, unfortunately. It would be good to check probably after this show, just to go on their channel, see if they're live or if they have a planned live. But typically they do 1 or 2 shows a week. But Josh is a good guy. I'm glad that I get to meet him. Alright, so continuing on. The Bermuda or Devil's Triangle is an imaginary area located off the southern Atlantic coast of the United States, which is noted for a high incidence of unexplained losses of ships, small boats, and aircraft. The apexes of the triangle are generally accepted to be Bermuda, Miami, Florida, and San Juan, Puerto Rico. In the past, extensive but futile Coast Guard searches prompted by search and rescue cases, such as the disappearances of an entire squadron of TBM Avengers shortly after takeoff from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, or the traceless sinking of the USS Cyclops and Marine Sulphur Queen, have lent credence to the popular belief in the mystery and the supernatural qualities of the Bermuda Triangle. And this author has 2 separate books that cover the TBM Avengers and the USS Cyclops. So the 5 military planes, and then the 1 military ship. And I do have both of those books now. But those will be after we finish this book and the part 2 of this book, which was released in 2017. That's the soonest I could see us covering those 2 cases individually in depth, by going over those books. But those books are just about as thick as this, and they cover just those cases. So it goes into much further detail on those. I'll show them on camera at some point. I don't feel like getting up right now and showing. Oh, is that right, Texas? It's hard to hear that. It's tough to hear that. Hopefully Josh is feeling better. So I believe this is like what we're reading right now. I mean, this is something else. This must have been one of those publications. It might even be the Associated Press one. But we'll see. I can't say for sure. But this is more of a bold text in the book here. It's different from the rest of it that's printed. Countless theories attempting to explain the many disappearances have been offered throughout the history of the area. The most practical seem to be environmental, and those citing human error. The majority of disappearances can be attributed to the area's unique environmental features. First, the Devil's Triangle is one of the two places on Earth that a magnetic compass does point towards true north. Normally, it points toward magnetic north. The difference between the two is known as compass variation. The amount of variation changes by as much as 20 degrees as one circumnavigates the Earth. If this compass variation or error is not compensated for, a navigator could find himself far off course and in deep trouble. An area called the Devil's Sea by Japanese and Filipino seamen, located off the coast of Japan, and I think that will be another deep dive series in itself, the Devil's Sea. That'll be after we get pretty far into the Great Lakes Triangle, which we started last Friday. And tomorrow is part 2, and right now that's only for the paying members of the channel. That's a treat to those who are members. And I'm trying to figure what I'll do with members only releases going forward. In the next few months I might actually reboot my Patreon, and then I'll have exclusive content through the Patreon at the current member rate that we have on this channel, and I might eventually reduce the membership cost per month for YouTube. That way we got different tiers. We have people who want to just support the YouTube channel, but then those of you that want more content from me, it can get a little more personal with doing more shows and whatnot. That's what I want to use the Patreon for. But I'm gonna go get those 2 books real quick, so just give me one moment here. I'll be right back. Okay. So just a heads up for everyone, because I do plan on doing this series for quite a while. We got the Bermuda Triangle. It's really dark for some reason. By Gian J. Quasar, Into the Bermuda Triangle. That's what we're reading from right now. After that, we'll be reading the follow-up to that, which is 13 years after. So the current book we're reading is 2004. This is 2017. Same author. But also by the same author is The Flight of the Avengers. A whole book of just about that. And then also an entire book just about the Cyclops. So all that material. And then if you even want to include what we're reading right now, that's what we're looking at for this series. So buckle up. And you know what? At some point I might do short reels with some of this information, but I don't have time for that right now. It's like it's nonsense for me to even think about that when we got 2-hour shows every week. I'm just reading the comments here. Yeah, it's really... I don't know how to explain it. But there is a power of manifestation. Especially with our thoughts and words. I've talked about this on Abe's show. But we need to be thinking positive thoughts. We can't be feeding into this loop. But it's like a feedback loop. If any of us are getting attacked, we cannot just go attack the same way back. Like calling the people names on live streams, like, I'm not about that. Most times I just say, God bless you. Because clearly these people need to be blessed. If their lives are so terrible they feel they need to take their anger out on others, then that's that. And plus it detracts from the content at hand. It's really unfortunate, because then people go off on tangents about, oh, this person's been doing this. I just straight up block people on this channel. If you guys are giving me a hard time, then you're just blocked. It's a lot easier on my end. Then I don't put energy into it. And I know Josh does the same thing. And he has really good mods that take care of that. But, I mean, I find myself challenging ideas from time to time. Like, I'm not going to stay silent on certain subjects. I'm going to weigh in with the truth and facts. But I'm not approaching it from an emotional perspective. And some people might get confused by that. Like, how can you do that? Well, if I have information that's contrary to what these people are sharing, then I'll share mine. I'll share what I have. But if people don't want to look into certain subjects as thoroughly as I have, then that's their problem. But they should... That's all I'll say on that. And see, that way everything remains civil. If you noticed on these other channels, I've never sworn at anybody. I've never cursed anyone out. It's just not me. Oh, wow. Yeah, you know, well, I did a prayer on Tuesday's show with Coral Castle. We'll do another short prayer at the end of this stream. Just for good measure. Because that sounds like that was a pretty bad attack that happened. I don't like hearing about it, but you guys are reporting your experiences, so... all we can do is pray up with that. So I think I left off here. We're on page 87. The area called the Devil's Sea. So yeah, I'll be doing that. We'll be looking into that, but not in this deep dive series. Like, it's connected to this, but I think it deserves its own separate thing. That way, everything's a little more organized. If you want to just research on the Devil's Sea, then that'll have its own deep dive series. If you want to just research about the Great Lakes Triangle, that'll have its own deep dive series and playlist. Just like this one. And I mean, we're on the second book. We read the Charles Berlitz book cover to cover. And now we're going through the Gian J Quasar books, and we got 4 of them to do. And here I was just thinking there's this one plus maybe 2 or 3 others that were worth reading, but this author's very well versed. He has a lot of information here. And so I think this is the right approach. But let's continue reading here. Another environmental factor is the character of the Gulf Stream. It is extremely swift and turbulent and can quickly erase any evidence of a disaster. The unpredictable Caribbean Atlantic weather pattern also plays its role. Sudden local thunderstorms and waterspouts often spell disaster for pilots and mariners. Finally, the topography of the ocean floor varies from extensive shoals around the islands to some of the deepest marine trenches in the world. See, that's why I was saying some of these islands used to be mountains at one point. With the interaction of the strong currents over many reefs, the topography is in a state of constant flux, and development of new navigational hazards is swift. I need to take a drink of water here, so just bear with me. Yeah, guys, I don't mind talking about a few things off subject that's going on while we're doing this, but I'm not going to turn it into some 20-minute side tangent. It's not productive, and I'm trying to get through this as efficiently as possible, so that's just how it is. It's all good though. Alright, let's continue on. Not to be underestimated is the human error factor. A large number of pleasure boats travel the waters between Florida's Gold Coast and the Bahamas. All too often, crossings are attempted with too small a boat, insufficient knowledge of the area's hazards, and a lack of good seamanship. The Coast Guard, in short, is not impressed with supernatural explanations of disasters at sea. It has been our experience that the combined forces of nature and unpredictability of mankind outdo even the most far-fetched science fiction many times a year. Each year. So that's the rest of that emboldened text, and I guess we're going back into Quasar's words here now. Enlarging somewhat on their hypothesis, the reason there is, quote, compass variation, end quote, on Earth is that there is a difference between true north and magnetic north. The magnetic field of this planet can be likened to a bar magnet, with the two ends representing the north and south magnetic poles. The bar or central line between these 2 points is its axis, or as it is called in geophysics, the agonic line. And that's spelled A-G-O-N-I-C. Although we associate the North Pole with the absolute geographic north on this planet, the compass actually associates magnetic north with true north. This would present no problem except that the northern magnetic pole, or magnetic north, is located at Prince of Wales Island in the frozen Northwest Territories of Canada, about 1,500 miles south of the North Pole. And this was back in 2004, so I'm sure it's changed since then. At least I've seen graphics that have shown that it's changed. Yeah, 21 years. I'm sure there's some slight changes and variations. This causes a great discrepancy for a navigator in the cardinal points of north, south, east, and west because the compass has a tilted perspective of the Earth. At the Azores, for instance, magnetic north and true north are about 24 degrees off. A navigator would have to add 24 degrees to his course to maintain a true heading north. If heading north, he must steer 24 degrees. Even at the agonic line, the compass still points to magnetic north. But here one is longitudinally directly south of Prince of Wales Island, which in turn is directly south of the North Pole. Therefore, the compass needle points to true north incidentally, because they are briefly in line. For practical purposes, the Coast Guard solution could never really apply since the agonic line is a very narrow corridor of longitude in the overall triangle. When the Coast Guard wrote its little chit, the agonic line was off the east coast of Florida. Already at Bimini Island, only 50 miles from Miami, there was a 2-degree charted westerly variation. Failing to compensate for this slight variation would not have resulted in a plane lost before Bimini. Incidentally, if flying over Bimini at 10,000 feet, one can see Miami. Moreover, a navigator can get lost from inaccurately adjusting his heading anywhere in the world, whether there be a 12-degree difference, 2 degrees, or none. Yet other parts of the world do not have so many disappearances. Today their statement is completely outdated, although still in wide circulation, because magnetic north subtly shifts over time in response to rotational changes in the molten core of the planet. The agonic line is now off the west coast of Florida, beyond Key West. To those detractors of the Bermuda Triangle enigma, completely outside it. Yet disappearances still continue, many of them along the same routes as before. Most of them are clearly not in the Gulf of Mexico, where the lack of compass variation now exists. So I think what this is saying is everything's still falling within this general triangle. The broader one that we have here from John Wallace and Ivan T. Anderson, right? Or no, John Spencer and Richard Weiners. Almost didn't write his name down. And that's W-I-N-E-R. So, I guess even though the magnetic west and magnetic north, they're always varying, it does seem like these disappearances are not in variation. They're still falling within the same general area. And then we'll look at that map again. So I'd actually go with this larger dotted line for what would be the area. But the smaller triangle there up to the left by Florida, that's the initial Bermuda Triangle. So it's basically like, that's the first account of what the triangle might be. But then with all of these other disappearances, it opens up quite a bit. But it's still generally a triangle when you're considering the different points that are within the triangle. Like the locations. The land locations. So Bermuda, Miami, Puerto Rico. Generally, you could say it's within those boundaries, but I mean, technically, it's a larger area overall. Alright, continuing on. Although the Coast Guard blames this simple element of navigation for most of the losses, it overlooks the fact that if a navigator becomes lost, he can still transmit an SOS. A pilot who is lost and slowly running out of fuel realizes he's in trouble and starts calling for help. Nor can it explain the lack of any debris after, presumably, a plane must have crashed. The records show that pilots reported themselves lost on only a couple of occasions. How they got lost we do not know, since they then vanished. Others vanished after blurting a few sudden words, apparently not having had prior warning, and some vanished while on radar inside of landing. Lost planes that seem to justify the Coast Guard's scenario are few and far between. What is applicable to aircraft is not necessarily so for boats and ships. There are, in fact, so many islands along the Bahamas that a boat captain can easily steer by point of sight navigating without using his compass. Should the boat become lost, there is still time to call for help. When it runs out of gas, it does not fall thousands of feet to the surface. It remains static on the ocean. Yet far more boats have vanished in this area than aircraft. And again, there's accounts where they should be sending an SOS out if there is a problem. And some of these vessels that disappear, both planes and ships, they say all is well just before vanishing. And this happens on calm seas, no turbulence, weather that is clear, no storms in the vicinity. So those are the ones that really make me scratch my head on all this. Considering the simple and brief lack of compass variation as a viable cause, the Coast Guard synopsis presupposes that the majority of pilots and navigators who vanished failed not to compensate, were not able to call when they realized they were lost, and had subsequently traveled so far off their course that no debris was recoverable. A combination of the above was deemed, quote, beyond probability, end quote, in the assessment of Star Tiger's loss. The Star Tiger was one of the vessels. So we also have these magnetic ley lines. We have a map here or not a map, but a drawing. It says the agonic line today, it is far out of the strict triangle and continuing to move westward. The compasses show how compass variation happens. Each compass always points to north, meaning magnetic north. But as one circumnavigates the Earth, the disparity between true and magnetic north widens because the compass remains fixed on magnetic north, not on the actual true North Pole. Thus, north can be up to 20 or more degrees either west or east of actual geographic north. I think this one's fascinating here. So the magnetic north is where we see all these lines converging on. The agonic line, that's one that's constantly moving. And you can see right there, it's in 2004, that's where it was. So maybe that'll be something for me to look up. Where is it in 2025? Alright, we just hit an hour. Very good. We got about 7 pages left for the chapter here. Yeah, I'm going to have to really dig into this one to find where it's at. I want to say it's back to the east side of Florida now. I'll have to confirm that later. Alright, let's carry on here. It also ignores the fact that many of the pilots were local and well-experienced charter pilots with thousands of hours flight time. They were obviously familiar with the area's charted magnetic variations. Nevertheless, human error doesn't have to hinge on the compass variation issue. It can stem from many other factors. Retired pilot George Smith, who was trained at Banana River, Florida, in Martin Mariners, and later flew extensively in the Bermuda Triangle, is wary of people who come to hasty conclusions about the supernatural and calls these explanations, quote, just bull, end quote. From his experience, he prefers to concentrate on some of the basic mistakes in flying, plus some of the area's unique hazards, as recorded in a conversation at his home. So he says here, you can get confused very easily. Rapid movements of the head, movements of the aircraft and whatnot. I know specifically of one guy who told me one night that he was having a hard time making upside down right. He couldn't tell whether the stars were the land where he had seen some lights or whether it was the other way around. He kept rolling that F3H demon around trying to discover which was up and which was down. Then he's asked a question. The sea off Florida's east coast is often noted for a white, humid haze. Have you ever experienced a whiteout in which there is no horizon, where the ocean and sky blend together? And here's his answer. That's not as uncommon as you think. You can get it in snow too. You lose your equilibrium, you get vertigo, is what you can do. It's not that uncommon at all in the Florida area if you're out over water. There are different types of cloud layers and situations that you fly through at some point in time that you better put your ultimate faith in your instruments inside the airplane. Lock your eyeballs inside that airplane and keep your instruments where they belong, and believe them that you're right side up or in a left turn or right turn or whatever. Because if you start trying to follow your eyes on the outside of the airplane, the next thing you'll be doing is what they used to call a, quote, dead man's spiral, end quote. You just go down and down and go into the water, and you don't even know it. Your mind is telling you that you're flying straight, and you aren't. That's typical vertigo. Sometimes we think of clouds as being up and down, or they're nice horizontal layers, but they're not always that way. You have some that drift in sideways, or something like that, and maybe you don't see the ocean, and sometimes you think you are. You just don't know. So I don't have a problem with a pilot being confused, but he better be looking to his instruments and believe them. But he concludes grimly, quote, if they're wrong, you're in real trouble, end quote. The National Transportation Safety Board has expressed that overwater navigation may have been the culprit of some disappearances. To avoid the strictures of investigative red tape, they list their conjecture as a, quote, remark, end quote, such as the, quote, pilot exceeded his experience/ability level, end quote, or just, quote, pilot's first overwater flight, end quote. This was expressed in the disappearance of the Musketeer N922RZ, and in parentheses it says Ziegler and Fines, F-I-N-E-S, on January 11th, 1979, although in itself this isn't proof that human error played a part in the loss. In the dossier on the flight of Anthony Purcell, the pilot of the Ted Smith 601 Aerostar and the NTSB recorded that the altimeter on the aircraft was known not to have been working properly. It is noteworthy that Purcell vanished while descending. Without a working altimeter, he may have misjudged his rate of descent and banked the plane into a deadly spin, plunging it into the sea. There were a few more aircraft disappearances where the pilot had a low number of flight hours experience. But it is interesting to note that most of the astonishing disappearances were charter aircraft, with the pilots possessing thousands of hours experience. The cases where human error could even be inferred, or at least should be listed tentatively, are still relatively few. So far, that leaves us with an unacceptable amount of losses, where there was no official conjecture offered beyond the Spartan and somewhat annoying, quote, aircraft damage and injury index presumed, end quote. Ship and boat losses from human error seem harder to accept, at least with the same degree of danger faced by a pilot, for vertigo cannot result in a boat plunging miles to the sea and being obliterated by impact. At the comparatively low speeds boats travel, getting lost is not going to take them out of radio range quickly. Nevertheless, some boat disappearances may be preceded by some calamities genuinely unique to yachting, like torching the boat from knocking over the barbecue. In one case, a fisherman spilled gasoline over his boat, which seeped quickly down into the bilge. Desiring to get rid of the potentially flammable liquid, he opened the bilge plug to let it drain out, forgetting that the ocean would instead flood into his boat. In another, a cigar-chewing skipper dribbled gas all along his deck while refueling his motor from a portable tank. Desiring a smoke, he lit his cigar, took a satisfying drag. Then, though there was an ocean around him, he threw the match down on the deck. Vroom! He still survived, though somewhat more charred. Yikes. Alright, Texas Learning. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. Alright, we got 5 pages left. 4.5. Mechanical failure in an airplane is often harder to imply because, again, at sea it can only be an assumption, but it happens often enough in accidents over land where debris can be sifted and the mechanical problem exposed. Since disappearances only occur over the ocean, it is often said that there is really no mystery in these losses whatsoever. The ocean, with its many currents and its deep trenches, merely covers up the remains of what otherwise would have been exposed as a, quote, normal, unquote, accident had it happened over land and been accessible for investigation. It is a fact that some of the most treacherous currents in the world do exist in the Triangle, such as the Florida Current and the Gulf Stream. The former, off Florida, moves at the incredible speed of 4 knots, close to 5 miles per hour. That's the current. Merely drifting in this current, a boat can be exceeding harbor speed limits. Moreover, the Gulf Stream is full of tangential currents below, eddies and undertows. A plane or ship that crashes or sinks here would effectively be spread out quickly and even be further broken up as it sank through the tumultuous colliding currents beneath. Coast Guard searches, however, do take into account the drift and speeds of this current and compensate for it in defining their search areas. This is dependent, of course, on knowing that an aircraft or boat is in trouble over this area. But with the lack of SOS in most cases, searches can be hours or days late. In such a scenario, it is not surprising that no debris is found. Nevertheless, there are dozens of accidents over this area each year in which wreckage is recovered quickly and examined thoroughly. Power loss in the Gulf Stream's turbulent waves, especially when its northbound course is buffeted by southwest winds, can swamp and founder a boat with low freeboard. It can be such a turbulent ride that many seasoned yachters prefer to head down to the Keys and use the Gulf Stream as a conveyor belt rather than cut directly across it, then glide off at the Bahamas. So that's interesting. Boats hitting, quote, unknown objects, unquote, in the Gulf Stream is not uncommon, and it accounts for many known sinkings. Much of this is debris pulled from the Gulf by the strong current. It can range from tree trunks to the hulls of boats that do not sink all the way because of corking or built-in flotation. Whatever they all are, the Coast Guard is routinely called upon to destroy, quote, underwater navigational hazards, end quote. An example of to what extent people have sought to embrace a prosaic and quick solution to the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle can be found in the continued promotion of a near 30-year-old book by Larry Kusch, spelled Kuschche, titled The Bermuda Triangle Mystery Solved, and is claimed to have exposed the true and banal facts of each case, chiefly via the method of browsing old newspaper articles. So that's one I'm not going to look at, because that's one that's trying to debunk everything, and this guy says right here it's just based off of newspaper articles. I actually think I looked at that one when researching this current book that we're reading now. So they're just trying to explain away without much speculation, I guess. Very narrow, like the U.S. Coast Guard. His title and conclusion, however, become a ghastly canard when the results of his newspaper browsing is compared to the contents of lengthy and detailed official accident reports, the repositories of some of which he knew. Nevertheless, he repeatedly defers to inaccurate or incomplete sources. For instance, in the case of Tyler 41, he relies on an obscure newspaper report erroneously claiming Tawny's last message was sent from a location where the search later found an oil slick, implying the plane merely plummeted to the sea. The official U.S. Air Force mishap report made it clear that the KB-50 was heard hours later and hundreds of miles past the spot. In another case, he, quote, solved, end quote, a non-existent accident with hearsay information, believing a C-54 in 1947 was a B-29 bomber hundreds of miles away. Yeah, that's not right. And you know, these researchers can also have errors with their reports, but Quasar here seems to really know what he's doing. Out of the other 60 or so cases Kusch bothered to present, ambiguity is the common conclusion. Most cases remain unsolved, and he avoids or is ignorant of such hot cases as the two C-133 cargo masters, the Sting 27, dozens of military flights, plus 37 civil aircraft losses between 1960 and 1972, and Coast Guard statistics on 47 missing vessels between 1970 and his writing, which was in 1974. But he nevertheless claims he found twice as many that disappeared outside of the triangle, though he mentions no names, and deduces that, quote, mystery writers, end quote, must have ignored them in order to make the triangle stand out. Yeah, show your evidence, dude. An example of his investigative process can be gleaned from the following. For one of the most tragic disappearances in the triangle, Flight 441 in October 1954, he merely reproduces verbatim a New York Times article and then adds this strategic addendum, quote, "The search was abandoned on November 4th, and in brackets this says actually November 11th, because of extreme weather conditions," end quote, thereby misrepresenting the entire incident, for the accident report clarified the weather was, quote, typical, end quote, for this time of year. In parentheses it says isolated thunder showers. And that Flight 441 carried weather radar and was flying over it. Quote, "The weather that Lieutenant Leonard, the pilot, was thought to have been subjected to was not beyond the capabilities of R7V1, nor was it thought to be beyond his own capabilities," end quote, the Board of Inquiry assessed. His, quote, "meticulous research," end quote, led to his overlooking the 1,500 papers amassed on the USS Cyclops and the 10-year search and investigation contained in such unimaginable repositories as the National Archives, in parentheses it says boxes 1068 through 1070 in the modern military branch. His desire to solve it based on his own hunches led to a statement that could make even Ripley sit up and blink. Quote, "I confidently decided that the newspapers, the Navy, and all the ships at sea had been wrong, and that there had been a storm near Norfolk that day strong enough to sink the ship," end quote. The documents at the National Archives and Records Administration make it clear there was no storm. Yet Cush wrote, quote, "Contrary to popular opinion, there never was an official inquiry into the disappearance. Had there been any investigation, the weather information would surely have been discovered," end quote. He claimed there was a storm on March 10th off the Virginia Capes. But throughout his entire recital, he never mentioned the Cyclops' estimated time of arrival at Baltimore on March 13th. If he had, his wishful storm of March 10th would have been exposed as long before the Cyclops was even due off the Capes. In the final analysis, the acrimony he directed at others can be returned to him. His solutions were based merely on faulty newspaper articles, elastic conclusions therefrom, and on the whole, trying to explain away why there was no debris or SOS. Combined with his inability or reluctance to even travel near the triangle, his research was no more informed than anybody who browses their daily blat during their morning coffee. The result was a debunk on popular discourse on the triangle, rather than actually documenting it. In an interview by Wanda Sue Parrott, in parentheses this says, riddle of the Bermuda Triangle, Kush rendered what is his own impression of his work. Quote, I don't like the word debunk because it carries with it the connotation that someone set out to prove someone else wrong, which was not what I did. My purpose throughout was not even to find a solution, but merely to write a book that reported each incident as objectively and honestly as possible. The solution was completely unintentional and an added bonus. End quote. This is arrogant. So I guess this guy was a narcissist too, right? Whether Kush added the idea of the solution or whether a publicity department did, it is in Kush's statement of his work that the Bermuda Triangle mystery solved might best still be viewed for it fits the contents of his book. It is as a look at the incidents. Many of the cases he lists neither solve nor, in some cases, even debunk the triangle. There is truth and there is error. But it is in comparing the content of the book with its title that the greatest disillusionment is found within the work. Although the Coast Guard has also been eager to affix blame for disappearances to many simple causes, it itself has been blamed for not actively pursuing vigorous searches, not just in the Triangle, but in less hazardous areas like a lake. In one case, a spokeswoman replied to the press proposal of using sonar to find the fishing boat Linda E. missing in Lake Michigan. There we go. Here we go. And she replied with, quote, we have done the investigation to the extent that is appropriate for this agency. We are not in the salvage business, end quote. When Congress became interested in the case, the young lady found out that the Coast Guard does as ordered to do. And the Linda E. was found 2 days later by sonar. The point is expanded by some who see a correlation with the Bermuda Triangle. Because of financing, the depths of the ocean, and the speed of currents, sonar is seldom used, and searches on the surface are often ritualistically carried out and discontinued in a few days or even hours. In parentheses, this says, however, sonar has been employed twice to find missing craft and still uncovered nothing. End parentheses. And quite frankly, the more bold will take up this lead and follow it to the investigation process. Investigators are not allowed to go beyond listing factually the known circumstances of any accident of undetermined origin. In fact, on the NTSB instructions sheet for the investigator, always included with every report so the reader knows under what conditions and to what purpose the report is being made, it reads under item 21, quote, this report, when submitted as the NTSB Factual Aircraft Accident Report, must not contain any opinions or conclusions. All attachments should be legible, reproducible original documents. End quote. The rest of the instructions concern bureaucratic and interagency handling. In essence, the case is investigated accurately with only the purpose of putting together a chain of events, sterile of any insight devoid of any desire to draw comparisons or plot cause and effect. The facts are then filed away. The only items entertained are those that would be considered to have an immediate impact on the case. Those, one must suppose, that fit the criterion of item 21. Presumably, the facts should be forthright enough to suggest the obvious answer. In practice, the Air Force operates under less strict guidelines laid down by the AFRs, or the Air Force regulations. However, according to AFR 4-33, paragraph 15C, or 15E, often recited to an inquirer, they cannot and will not release the opinions or conclusions their investigators come to. These pages are left out altogether, or such an opinion is expurgated by a razor, leaving nothing but a large open square in the text of the page, a daunting sight. It is understandable on the part of investigating bureaus, even advisable, that they make no conclusions or opinions, since there is nothing left from a disappearance upon which to base any conclusion. Most evidence is only circumstantial, however impressive the repetition may become. But the investigation of the mystery of this sea does not end here. There is a growing body of evidence from the experiences of those who actually sail and fly the Bermuda Triangle to suggest that very unexpected elements may have played a role in some of the disappearances. For decades, sailors have spoken about weird mirages, time lapses, fog, strange fogs and vapors, and ubiquitous electromagnetic anomalies and aberrations, as though the very fundamental laws of nature ceased to operate in a manner with which we have taken for granted. While it may be easy for some to dismiss these as modern sea superstitions, the persistence of the stories and the fact that official reports now contain allusions to such hot topics as time gaps in radio calls and weird objects in the sky. The stories are not being laughed off by an increasing number of conscientious observers. And with that is the end of chapter 4. So this addressed the naysayers today. Chapter 4. The title is Can It Be That Simple? Can it be as simple as these people writing it off as just another normal thing that happens? I would say, in my own conclusion up to this point, that it is not normal. There's something very unnatural happening here. But for next week, we have chapter 5, Those Who Lived to Tell. And I know I said earlier on this stream, if I can pull it off, I'll do 2 of these shows a week, but right now is not the time for me to do that. Next week's show, we'll be hitting the 2-hour mark on that show. Gladly, today we hit 1 hour and 32 minutes as of right now, so I'm happy with that. And we're going to be getting into more of the electromagnetism in Chapter 6, so 2 weeks from now. We're going to be getting into some very interesting stuff going forward. Because we've covered all of the factual evidence here so far on both planes and boats. Today we covered the dismissive observers of all of these incidents. Next week we'll be covering people who survived some of these strange incidents. And then we'll be getting into space-time vortices, zero-point energy, sunken worlds, warnings of lunar and Martian anomalies, interest from a past world. We got a lot of interesting stuff coming up. But this will be it for today. I appreciate y'all being here. And whether you catch this live or after the fact, doesn't bother me. Just as long as you're looking into this stuff. If this catches your interest, that's why you're here. So I appreciate you being here. I will see everyone that's a member tomorrow. We'll be doing part 2 of the Great Lakes Triangle. And we'll see how Saturday goes. We might be starting a new show Saturday. And it'll be pertaining to Illinois. More of a historical show. Just like the early Chicago film industry series, that was all mostly historical. Factual. Just I'm here to learn. Never stop learning. But that'll do it for today. Again, I appreciate y'all being here. And until the next one. Class dismissed.